The Texas School Book Depository, in many ways, it is the scene of the ultimate crime in certainly American history, one might say. Richard, of course, is the author of Clash of Dynasties, and he talks about the book depository in his book a bit. Um, and I'll have him talk about that in a second, but I want to start with this question. When folks, when you put forth your argument about the Rockefellers, there's pushback from certain um, factions. One might call it the CIA faction, one might call it the Dallas radical right faction, and tend to maybe say, well, you might be barking up the wrong tree. Um, what are you seeing in terms of that? Are you seeing movement towards Rockefeller as maybe being actually behind the thing? What's your take on what I've just posed to you?
I'm seeing movement. I'm going from a lone voice to being two or three voices. Trouble with this Kennedy assassination story has been so dominated by politics. People automatically, if you mention Rockefeller, well, he's a Republican. He's a Protestant. At least they identify with that belief system. So they're going to defend. They're automatically going to defend him. You've got the conservative right are going to defend that. Um, this has been the problem with this thing. That's why I keep maintaining a grassroots basis and facts, circumstantial evidence, of course. And, I believe the tide is turning in our direction. And more people, just like yourself, in studying this case, objectively, you kept bumping into Nelson Rockefeller, and you asked yourself a question: is Nelson Rockefeller involved in this? Then you found my books. Now you're more convinced of Nelson Rockefeller's role. And of course, my investigations keep continuing. My research is continuing. And it's just, we're just going to have to just keep believing in ourselves and keep trying to educate people to the truth. Um, I've never, for 1 minute, ever been discouraged by non-believers. And, every day I find new circumstantial evidence that continually points to the Rockefellers. So people are, first of all, part of the this whole thing is knee-jerk reactions. People have no clue about the Rockefellers. They don't know this stuff. So naturally, there's going to be knee-jerk reaction like, "Oh, that's crazy." No, that's out there. I spent 40 years understanding this and continuing to research and understand it, because the Rockefeller world is a massive universe and it's pretty much been blacked out. It operates in secrecy. And I'm going to continue to do this. And I appreciate all the support I get from people like yourself. But it's going to come from people like yourself who are informed, who get past the knee-jerk reaction.
So the book depository is part of your Clash of Dynasties as well, not just because it was the scene allegedly where the shots were fired on in Dealey Plaza on the 22nd November. You make a very startling claim. Tell me a little bit about how the book depository factors into Clash of Dynasties.
Well, most of my research has been in a broad background about the Rockefellers. I start from the top up and work down. You brought up, you found something twice. Well, first of all, the books. Okay, who are the biggest publishers of books in the country? The Rockefellers. Okay, you go to Rockefeller Center, you got Simon and Schuster headquartered there, and across the street is McGraw-Hill. And who knows how many other books are part of their book publishing oligarchy? And they publish most of the school books and textbooks. So they have heavy influence on what people think and learning. So if you had books in that, school books, they're being published by one or two of those big companies. And in fact, Alfred Knopf, we're talking about this meeting here. I see Knopf was here. Alfred Knopf at the meeting. We talked about last time.
Okay, just
Alfred Knopf, book publisher.
okay. So
See, this is
you're
all
referring
media.
Alfred Knopf
Alfred,
attended the November 22nd, was it the 1965 meeting?
yeah,
Okay.
he was there at there. And he owns a book publishing label, Alfred Knopf. Say. So you see books, if you go to the school book deposit in 1963 and you flipped open those book covers, it would say Rockefeller Center. The Rockefellers left their calling card. Well, nobody had the wherewithal to understand it at the time.
Yeah,
And books, somebody emailed me some information that they were storing guns there.
right.
Oh, yeah, guns, but don't tell me about guns. Remember what the old saying, the pen is mightier than the sword. So books are a huge part of the Rockefeller plan for world domination. That's mind control, especially in terms of school books. And if you know, Jacqueline Kennedy's grandfather, who lived at 740 Park, he built 740 Park where the Rockefellers lived. George lived next door. I found more addresses that connect him to the Rockefellers, by the way. He was chancellor of New York City schools. So is he selecting the books that the children were going to be reading and study in New York City and other towns and other cities? Yeah, books, like they say, the pen is mightier than the sword.
So you want to maybe put the brakes on folks who say, well, they were doing some kind of smuggling in terms of maybe weapons or import, export, maybe narcotics. That's really what the book depository was doing. You want to say, just hold off on that. We don't, I mean, we don't know that anyway.
Right. No, we don't know. Hey, maybe there was some boxes with books in them,
Gun.
with guns. But still, in this story, this greater world of the Rockefellers, books are more significant.
Yeah.
You start getting into social engineering and mind control.
It's a whole can of worms. Um,
Yeah.
I think it's also important to point out that, like you said, the depository people would have been involved with the state legislature. They would have been involved with school districts. They would have been involved with transportation, with the delivery and the shipment of the items. And so in terms of curriculum as well, like you said, in Texas specifically, the Good Neighbor policy, the Good Neighbor Commission was heavily involved in education. And we look at who sort of created that good neighbor propaganda piece. Who is that?
Nelson Rockefeller, of course. But you can also factor in their university systems. All the Ivy League colleges have a tremendous affiliation with the Rockefeller Foundation, the history of the Rockefeller and the history of the Rockefellers. So then again, it's about, and they're serving their greater ambition. The universities and the think tanks and are serving the greater ambition of the Rockefellers for world domination.
Yeah, yeah. So let's just lay this out real quick. So D.H. Byrd, who's the oil scion of Texas, um, purchases the building of 411 Elm in
Right.
1936. At the time, it is not the school book depository at all. In fact, the actual company only moved in a few months before the assassination in 1963. They were leasing it as early as 62, but it was vacant. So Byrd buys it. At the time he buys it, it's a company called International Harvester. That is the company
Right.
that's at 411 Elm that we know as the book
Right.
depository. International Harvester was run by who, Richard?
The International Harvester Corporation was known as the Reaper Trust, the Reaper Trust or the Harvester Trust, and it was put together by John Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan, the major harvester manufacturers in the country. Well, the biggest one was McCormick, and another one was John Daring. Now, John Rockefeller's youngest daughter, Edith, marries Harold McCormick, Cyrus McCormick's son. So right there, and then you have their connection to the infamous labor shooting there at Haymarket riot. This ties back to International Harvester. They're violent towards organized labor, but the Reaper Trust ties back to the city of Auburn because one of the companies merged in was the Osborne Works here in Auburn. It was a sprawling factory. They had 3 different locations in the city of Auburn. My father used to caddy for the Osborne family. Then when he turned 16, he lied his age and went to work for them, went into their factories, worked in their factories. By then it was International Harvester. See, and then one of their plants, and this was probably true with the building they called the Texas School Book Depository building. It probably was part of a sprawling factory, sprawling manufacturing works. And if you know, there was a railroad in the back.
Mhm.
Okay, well, the railroads back in the day, they brought in raw materials and shipped out the finished goods. Well, the city of Auburn, I remember when I was a young kid, there was this huge complex of buildings, almost in the heart of downtown Auburn. A huge complex of these great big brick buildings. It looked like the building in the famous building in Texas there. And there was a railroad yard. Well, that railroad yard was all, pretty much demolished and turned into a parking lot for a supermarket. Most of the big brick buildings went down and they became city parks. Now we're talking about Dealey Plaza, the grassy knoll, aren't those parks? So all stuff got repurposed. There's one section left of the original factory, which is maybe 1/10 of the original size, and that's being used for some small family-run retail outlet stores use that. So what we see in Auburn is almost a microcosm. What probably happened in Dealey Plaza, they took down most of the factory and put up a park where you had right in front of the grassy knoll there, put up a parking lot, put up some modern buildings. I haven't been in Dallas, but either well, that was also they built. When they took down some of the old factories, they put up a maybe a 10-story, 12-story building for senior citizens on the property. So it was being repurposed for living quarters and also for maybe office space. So that's what they were doing with these buildings, with these old factories.
Wow.
So I'll tie to the Rockefellers. And David Rockefeller talked about International Harvester in his book Memoirs. And he talked about International Harvester as their biggest company, their biggest customer. So I'd be curious to know who was holding the mortgage on that property that D.H. Byrd bought if it wasn't the Chase Bank. That could be another research project for somebody.
Good question. Now, I think it's worth pointing out, when he bought that building in 36, McCormick and Edith Rockefeller McCormick were already divorced. But I think it's safe to say that, the business stayed within the family, like you're
Absolutely.
saying. Um,
And it's also tied to Watergate because the McCormick family, if you know the history, they own the Chicago Tribune and other newspapers. Okay. Well, the Chicago Tribune was run by who? Robert McCormick. I think he went by Colonel. And the McCormick family, Chicago Tribune owned the Washington Post before they sold it to Eugene Meyer, who was with an investment firm called Lazard, which was headquartered where? 30 Rockefeller Plaza. And when David Rockefeller died 2 years ago, Lazard moved in and took over the family office in room 5600. And then Newsweek merged in with Washington Post. Newsweek was headquartered in Times Square in the Knickerbocker Hotel. That was their home for several years, and that was all owned and run by Vincent Astor. It was one of Nelson Rockefeller's close pal. And there's a whole chapter about the Astor Soviet spy ring. Goes on and on and on. Possible provoke the Japanese invasion of Pearl Harbor and things. And they were listening on reading telegrams and telephone calls, whatever they were doing.
yeah. Yeah.
So there's a whole history of ties.
One other thing on the International Harvester before we forget, you mentioned in your book that was it Mohrenschildt's father went to Europe or Russia. Was there an International Harvester connection there, if I try to remember?
Yes, there
You're
was.
insinuating it, right?
They had factories in Russia,
Who did? International Harvester
the
did.
International Harvester, which they lost to the Soviet, when they lost to the Bolshevik Revolution. And one of the McCormick's children was involved in an underground in the Soviet Union. Well, not exactly exact time, but it would have been, the takeover, following the Russian Revolution. They were running an underground to try to get what they lost back. And the Dulles brothers were involved with it, and probably George Mohrenschildt's father. And that's one of the things that really kind of really made me seriously think that this is a Rockefeller job because the Dulles brothers were so linked in with the Rockefellers that they were essentially their lawyers. So there's a link there between the Dulleses, the McCormick family, underground, and the, I'll say, Soviet Russia, and the loss of a lot of American property, including a company called Burisma. No,
As
not
in
Burisma.
Biden?
No, it's I'm sorry. Very similar name.
Okay.
Barnoble was the company. It was the first serious competitor to Standard Oil, and it was Russian oil. It was tied in with the Tsar, and it was also tied in with the Nobel family. That's why they call it Barnoble, the Nobel family. They were the primary investors in it, and it created a huge competition for Standard Oil. Standard Oil lost almost 40%, 60% of their market in Europe. And the Rockefellers, before the Bolshevik Revolution, the Rockefellers bought Barnoble, all right? And from the Nobel family knew it was coming on. They knew the Soviets were going to take that. The Bolshevik Revolution was going to take that. And they did. And the Rockefellers lost out. So they were also hell bent in getting Barnoble back. Now, George Morency's father and uncle were on the board of Barnoble. Mm-hmm. So they must have had a working relationship with the Rockefellers and Standard Oil when Standard Oil purchased Barnoble. And if you know, I go on a story. George's uncle Ferdinand, they call him the Baron, married William Gibbs McAdoo's daughter, Nona. And now there's a lot of tie into the Kennedy assassination and that lady Nona. And it goes on and on and on. We can talk chapters about that. And I'm finding more and more on her. I don't want to get too far off your from the Texas School Book Depository, the TSBD.
Yeah.
So you lead the question.
Okay, one other thing that I think it's worth saying is D.H. Byrd, of course, was the founder of one of the founders of the Civil Air Patrol. So we have another connection here. Who do you think founded the Civil Air Patrol, in your opinion?
The Rockefellers. David Rockefeller interned for Mayor LaGuardia. Mayor LaGuardia was head of the civilian defense. Okay, you got to understand something. When the Rockefellers are the interns, they're barking orders to the mayor. Okay, because nobody's above the Rockefellers. And when they see Rockefellers around, they're going to start doing a lot of butt kissing because they know they're looking for things, And so David Rockefeller was assigned to this, overseeing its creation by the mayor, and it was involved in civilian air patrol, patrolling the coast of the United States, where German U-2 boats were seeking an enormous number of Standard Oil tankers. The Rockefellers are always self-serving, and that's what it was originally at the heart of all that. And of course, David Ferry, the man who you research a lot, was the head of the chapter in New Orleans, and Oswald was in his squad. He used pictures of the two together. And this all ties back again to the Rockefellers.
Yeah. I think it's also worth pointing out, too, that Roy Truly, who was the superintendent of the book depository, who officially hired Oswald and was present there on 11/22/63, moonlit for, was it North American Aviation? I think it was. North American Aviation, which until 1938 was an entity that until 1938 owned Eastern Airlines, Richard. And so tell me about that.
But I think the overlord of all was General Motors. I think General Motors was the overlord of it all, owned Eastern Airlines, and the Rockefellers took control of it. And David Ferry was a flyer for Eastern Airlines until he got supposedly indicted for sodomy with a young boy. And Eastern Airlines is headquartered where? 10 Rockefeller Plaza. I've done videos of that, my videos.
Yeah, you have.
And the Rockefellers are trying to afford an aviation trust, as they did in steel, as they did in oil, as they did in so many other sectors. And also, that's also across the street, One Rockefeller Plaza was at the time headquartered General Dynamics, which are also building aircraft and also submarines. And that's a huge tie-in to the Kennedy assassination And I believe General Dynamics financed the assassination to the tune of $100,000 because of Henry Crown. You can trace it back to the murder of James Reagan that involved Jack Ruby and David Yarez, which tie hugely into the story. But I don't want to get too far off the trail with these Rockefeller properties. But also, Pan American Airways was birthed in the Standard Oil building, which was, you know, okay, they're all right along 48th Street and the southern border of Rockefeller Center. You got Eastern Airlines, you had General Dynamics, then you had Pan American, which the Rockefellers had a hand in birthing. John Hay Whitney, who's in this article here, who I implicated in the Kennedy assassination, was on the board of directors. And then, of course, there's the whole history of building a Pan Am building. So they had the landing rights in Havana, ties to the Cuban, the Bay of Pigs and all that. But you got to understand one thing about Rockefellers. They supply all the jet fuel to the airports in the nation. That's the biggest thing to know. And they were used to what they were doing was using right-of-ways for abandoned railroad tracks. And they were moving in, and it was Buckeye Pipeline was the biggest provider of jet fuel to every airport, most major airports in the country. So, and then of course, Lawrence Rockefeller, who ran Eastern Airlines for the family, he tried to buy out Howard Hughes with a consortium of involved Aristotle, the Greek shipping magnate, who also was in the oil business, Aristotle Onassis, and he involved Irna and William Zeckendorf, to buy out Howard Hughes, but supposedly Howard Hughes turned down the deal. But now we get into Howard Hughes. That's a massive story, and it involved Watergate.
Wow. Okay.
And it involves the motion industry, and it involves the MK Ultra, and it involves this. I can go on and on and on.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, no, that's okay. One thing I'm going to turn it over to you in a minute about what you want to highlight. But one last question: how would you answer when folks say there's no way Texas Oil, Bird, H.L. Hunt, Murchison, Sid Richardson, there's no way they want to interact or deal with back east Rockefeller, right? Isn't he a competitor?
No, absolutely no. They had an all oil oligarchy. What these people had was land that was bubbling up oil or gushers. Some of them were farmers. There was a cattle ranch. There's a huge marriage between cattle ranching and oil. And by the way, the Rockefellers, well, I'll say were one of the biggest producers of beef in the world. The Rockefellers into so many sectors, but there was a marriage between beef and oil in Texas. Well, they made a movie about it called Giant, and then it became a popular TV series. So this is how it happened. This is how Texas landholders, selling cattle one day, next day they're oil rich because they're drilling oil wells on their property. So there was a marriage, but that oil has to be distributed through pipelines. It has to be refined. It has to be refined.
Just to
and
clarify.
It has to be refined. So what the Rockefellers wanted was a monopoly where everybody's got to get behind them. They didn't want competition or they destroy you.
When you say beef, I mean, we're talking cattle.
Right.
Okay.
No, I'm talking about that too. Their beef monopoly. Yeah. That's another huge story. Ties in with Winthrop Rockefeller. Their big ranches down in South America, over 1 million acres in ranch sizes in South America, Brazil. We could go on forever about that.
Yeah.
But they wanted a monopoly. The oil, when it comes out of the ground, it has to be refined. It has to be transported. It has to be refined. Then it has to be retailed. The Rockefellers controlled all that system. So these oil producers like Hunts and D.H. Bird and the other name there, the Dallas Cowboys, Richardson, and they have to go into the Rockefeller system of pipelines, refining. They have to do it. They just can't stand on a street corner and dish out crude oil. So they understand the rule of monopoly that Rockefeller formalized, and then he took that monopoly plan to every sector. Didn't stop at oil. Went into steel, went into utilities, went into railroads, went it goes on and on and on. Went into broadcasting, went into movie making. It doesn't make any difference. They only go into a sector if they can control the sector. But you might not know that. They might have 3 or 4 companies, but they're really being controlled all by the Rockefellers above the boardroom level. And now we get into 501c3 networks.
Right.
Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundations, goes on and on and on. We can go on forever. It'll always go, no matter what you talk about in this Kennedy assassination story, it will always trace back to the Rockefellers with few exceptions.
What's something that you want to highlight that you've uncovered lately?
Well, here it is. This meeting, number one, I'm still researching this. We talked about this meeting. They held an anniversary to celebrate, I believe, the assassination of JFK on November 22nd, 1965. Okay. We talked about some of these names here, but there's three names. Frank Stanton, who was president of CBS, and William Paley's here.
Really? Yeah, CBS.
Founded CBS. Nelson Rockefeller's closest pals. Thomas J. Watson, IBM, probably the son, Jr., and David Sarnoff. David Sarnoff had a huge role in the history of RCA, Radio Corporation of America, and also RKO, the movie company, founded by the Kennedys and the Rockefeller. They were the first two tenants in Rockefeller Center. Well, here's the thing. In 1963, this I found out, Frank Stanton, David Sarnoff, and Thomas Watson were on the board of the Rockefeller Foundation. Were on the board of the Rockefeller Foundation. And who's sitting in the middle of it? Little Alan Dulles, co-author of the Warren Commission cover-up. He sit with all these mighty people, almost like a guest of honor in this group. And we got Conrad Hilton, who ran the hotels where the gangsters were running out of. Now, another article I found, tremendous gold. These are gold dust. Here it is, 1938. Weekend parties at Newport and Vanderbilt parties. This was in a social column in the New York Times. Can you see it?
Now I can.
Okay. This is George's cousin. Let me read this. Debut today of Fernanda de Morenchides. That's George's cousin, first cousin. His uncle, Fernand, the Bear, they call him, Ferdinand, that's his daughter. And it's the daughter, William Gibbs McAdoo, who was Wilson's Secretary of Treasury. That's a huge story with these people. I'm finding more and more. I don't have time to cover it all. But I go down, a lot of names are connected with the Kennedy assassination, right? This is in Newport now. But there's one name here pops out. Well, I could go out over and over. There's a lot of names here. But I see this one name, Miss Diana Dilworth. I go, wow, this is an 18-year-old maiden, okay? This is kind of like a coming out party for very rich ladies, young ladies. Miss Diana Dilworth. I'm saying, could this possibly be a connection with J. Richardson Dilworth? Now, that connects to everything. That connects to the thing. I'm going to tell you why. Connects to the single bull theory. Well, so then I found her wedding announcement. 4 years later, she got married. And who got the wedding? J. Richardson Dilworth. And they're related to, they have I know it's the same family. It's probably her brother, this Logan. They were descendants from this Logan, who some General Logan served in the American Civil War or something. I'm still doing research on it. But J. Richardson Dilworth, he came out of behind the veil when Nelson Rockefeller went for his confirmation hearing before the Senate, and he was trying to explain that Nelson Rockefeller didn't have any conflicts of interest. And it came out that he ran the Rockefeller office, room 5600, what they call the family office. And he also handled the personal finances of the Rockefellers. So I went to his Wikipedia page. And I'm familiar with this guy. I mean, I know him. I didn't know he was, see, they mentioned this, he's Skull and Bones. There's a huge connection with the Kennedy assassination, Skull and Bones. Now, if you go from Rockefeller Center, well, 6th Avenue, you go across the street, what's across the street? Well, Time Life. Remember, Time Life bought the purchase of
Henry Luce.
Time Life. Henry Luce.
And
Skull
Jackson.
and Bones.
Yeah.
And Skull and Bones. Okay. Now you come down here. We'll talk all about the Rockefeller family, GE building, blah, 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 blah. Nelson Rockefeller, Gerald Ford, blah, blah, blah. Oh, come to find out. He worked for the Rockefellers, but he had one notable employee working for him who assist counsel. He was assistant counsel to the 36th President's Commission. What is that? That's the Warren Commission. It says right here, Warren Commission. His name is William Thaddeus Coleman. Okay. Well, now here's another thing. Richardson Dilworth is related to the mayor of Richardson Dilworth. He's related to the mayor of Philadelphia, who was not only the mayor of Philadelphia, but he was a party boss there, Democrat party boss. But these are conservative Democrats now. Well, Richardson Dilworth, who came out of that political machine, Alan Specter, who came up,
single bullet theory.
Yeah, or also known as the magic ball theory, depending on what perspective you take. And this Thaddeus Coleman, I'm going to try to learn more of his role, but he sat on a lot of corporations. He sat on the corporation of Chase Bank. Okay, he sat on the corporation of PepsiCo. Now, PepsiCo, there's a big link to PepsiCo, Jack Ruby, and the CIA. Well, PepsiCo was one of the corporate sponsors for Council on Foreign Relations. But he also had a distinction. He was at Chase Bank, IBM, PepsiCo, and Pan American World. We just mentioned Pan Am. See, they're stand-ins for the Rockefellers. But here's the thing. He had the distinction of going to Cuba and meeting with Castro for 3 hours. Apparently, Castro wanted this thing to say that he had no part in this Kennedy assassination, what he did not. But here's the thing. The Rockefellers planted false evidence that Castro was behind it. That's why they locked all those records away, because Lyndon Johnson didn't want to go into a war. They wanted to provide a cover. They wanted to blame it on Castro. They planted fake evidence that he was behind it so they could give a cover for a U.S. invasion. But if you're going to take on Castro, you're going to be taking on the Soviet Union. So apparently these people had great ambitions. And that's why Johnson locked everything away. And the Rockefellers had to go along with it because, for one thing, Oswald got arrested. They had a problem there. Oswald was supposed to have been taken down by Ruby and Juarez to Mexico and have him assassinated. See, so when he got caught, their whole plan kind of got knocked a little skewed. But there's so much here. It mentions Earl Warren. So here you have the Rockefeller family office. You have a Skull and Bones member. You have a Warren Commission member. So who wrote the Warren Commission? The Rockefeller.
By proxy. By proxy.
To celebrate the killing, the assassination, November 22nd. Nobody in the world is going to tell me this was a coincidence. And we talked about, I won't go into it now, Lowell Thomas and his ties to the oil in Saudi Arabia. Goes on and on. We talked about it last time. It just goes on and on. And then I also found out Miss Dilworth had a coming out party too. And who's there at the coming out party? I don't think I can find it, but I'll cut to the chase. I'll tell you who it was. It was Nelson Rockefeller's cousin, right here. Diana Dilworth and Mary Eldridge make debuts at large dances on Long Island. Well, who's Mary Dilworth? Nelson Rockefeller's first cousin. Okay, and it mentions John Rockefeller II as her uncle, and it mentions all the Eldridges. Well, Nelson Rockefeller's mother was an Eldridge.
Wow.
So it goes on. It also mentions too here, and it's when Diane got married. They mentioned this. I never heard it before, but a matron of honor. I'm going to have to research that. What is meant by a matron of honor? But she was a Pine. She was a Pine. Now, the Pines have a huge family, a huge connection with Citibank. Moses Taylor was like the Astors, a Manhattan real estate developer. And George's aunt, Nona, married for the third time into that family when she married Francis Bishop Taylor. The Bishops had married in with Moses Taylor's kids. They had married in with the Pine family. And also mentioned the Grafton Pines. So the Grafton family also ties in with the history of Standard Oil. They were heirs of Standard Oil money too. To Stanley Mortimer Jr., his mother was a Grafton. They were heirs of Standard Oil money. Standard Oil made a lot of people rich besides the Rockefellers.
I think that's a great point. Standard Oil made a lot of people rich besides the Rockefellers, as you're pointing out, all these proxies and all these people taking their place, as you suggest. We're gonna have to cut it here, Richard. We're gonna pick this up again for another one on the Explorers Club and what you're finding out, man. But you're digging away. You
I
got
found
one final
another.
thing?
Well, I've got another address. Well, we're going to go over to Explorers Club next time, and this ties into it. But also, I found another address right in the neighborhood there from FBI documents. George was supposedly living there back in. We're going to go over it. Might tie to the possible U.S. prodding Japan, Imperial Japanese nation, to bomb Pearl Harbor. And you're going to see some of the links I'm finding, and the Kennedy assassination too. This George had to have been a super secret agent for the Rockefellers. He had to have been. I don't think he had any. I don't think he had any intrinsic value, meaning that he didn't own some major corporation or he didn't own a bank. He just was a runner for these people,
Yeah.
doing dirty jobs for them.
I'll just mention real quick about that. He's a University of Texas alum, I believe, 1945 geologist. Big donor, big alum of that school was D.H. Byrd, also an alum, also a
Exactly.
geology major. So, um, but it's just a coincidence, apparently. So I
It's
guess it
more
doesn't
than a
matter.
coincidence. It's a secret hand of the Rockefellers manipulating. There was a book written one time called the Devil's Chessboard.
Yeah, by Talbot, right?
So this cannot all be coincidental. It goes on and on forever.
Yeah, it's a good
The
book,
secret hand of
David
the rock.
Talbot.
Okay. But you're doing a lot of great research yourself. And
Thank you.
also, did we mention room 400, which was kind of the offices of McGraw Hill in the Texas TSBD?
So I think it's important
Other,
that of the 70, there were supposedly 73 people in and out of the TSBD on the day of 11/22. There are quite a number of these people are representative of the publishing companies who were leasing space to the TSBD. So there was this hand in glove relationship between the bookseller, the book publishers and distributors, and and the publishing companies, all of whom you suggest go back to the Rockefellers, in the same building.
well, like I said, Alfred Knopf was at this meeting. Alfred Knopf was a publisher.
Yeah.
There's also a connection too. If you go to 566, his name was Wolf, Bertrand Wolf. Tons of stuff on him I found. It ties to Watergate as well. He was a major manufacturer of books. He physically made the books. Somebody's got to print them and bind them.
Exactly.
And a connection to George Brinches, as per FBI documents.
Someone said the FBI documents are the ones that are going to reveal everything when it all comes out, not CIA,
No,
it's only FBI,
it's going to be. We got a couple minutes. I want to end on this note. Those documents could potentially be a big problem. Could potentially lead to a Holocaust, research Holocaust. Because what's going to happen? There's no documents that are going to tell you who killed Kennedy. What it is, it's going to be all those documents are going to have to be analyzed. And people with different theories are going to go into those documents and they're going to spin them to support their own theory. And if they don't have an eye to Rockefellers, which is not enough out there now because they don't know the Rockefeller. I spent 40 years studying these people. They're going to miss the connections to the Rockefellers. And some of those, you got to understand too, some of those are fake evidence that the Rockefellers made up to blame Castro. And people had their testimonies changed without their knowledge. And you got to assume people lied. So what are we looking at when those documents come out? Just an incompetent FBI. And that's why they don't want them to come out.
All right, Richard, take care.
All right.